C99 tutorial part 6. Last time we looked at counting characters using the while loop. This time we'll introduce one more loop. It's called the for loop. And then we'll use the for loop to do the counting characters problem. Let's look at our counting characters program one more time. Notice what elements we have. We have in the beginning an initialization of our counter. Our counter is NC. And during the while condition, we always evaluate whether it's the end of file. Finally, we increment NC as long as it's not the end of file. And at the end, we print out how many characters there were using the NC value. It turns out that these three elements are the elements of a for loop. To demonstrate this, let's use a simple program that I prepared called forloop.c. So how does this work? We have an integer I that starts at 0, and the loop condition, while I is less than 10. So in the body, I print the integer and a new line, and this happens so long as I is less than 10. So if you look at this code, it seems like I'm trying to print the integers 0 through 9, but it turns out there's a mistake here, because this loop will actually run forever. Why is that? Consider the initial value of I. I is initially 0, and the loop condition says while I is less than 10, and at no point do we change the value of I. Therefore, I will always be less than 10. So how can we fix it? Let's add an increment to the end. So first let me add some braces, and then at the end, I++. And what's I++? It means increment the value of I by 1. It's the same as I equals I plus 1. So if we look at this loop, we have these three pieces. We have the initial value, which we set to 0. We have a test, which is our expression in the while loop. And we have an increment. So together these three pieces form the three pieces of information we need for a typical loop. And we call this a for loop. How many times should this loop run? We see it should run 10 times. I starts at 0, and then 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 9. And then the loop should terminate. That is, when I equals 9, then this expression is still true, and so it should print 9. But when I becomes 10, then it's false. 10 is not less than 10. So suppose we do something like the following. At the end of the loop, we can add one more statement. We'll add a statement like this. At the end of the loop, I has the value %d, and then give it the value I. So let's try to compile and run the program. Start the command prompt. I'm going to use the desktop for this one. So let's compile it first. gcc forloop.c, and let's use -o forloop.exe, and recall that means that the output of the compilation will go to forloop.exe. So there you go, there's a program forloop.exe. So I get the output 0 through 9, and at the end I has the value 10. So how do we do it as a for loop? Here we go, type for, and then we give the three parts. So the first part is int I equals 0, and then semicolon. And then the next part, I less than 10, semicolon. Finally, the increment part, I++. And that's our for loop. So afterward comes the body of the for loop. The body is what we want to do as we go through the loop. So in this case, we want the print statement. So I'm going to copy the printf line into the body. So in this example, it just prints the value of I. So now this other code, we can just get rid of this, or we can just comment it out. If we comment it out, then the compiler will ignore it. Now, there's one technicality with the for loop, and that's as follows. If you declare a variable as part of the first part, like this, int I, then it's available only inside the for loop. But if we want to use it again outside of the for loop, we have to declare it outside of the for loop, like this. And to make sure you can compile both variations, be sure to use the flag for GCC -std equals GNU99. That puts it in C99 mode. So anyway, this program gives the same result as the while loop. So this message at the end, we just did this just for demonstration purposes. So let's remove that now and show a more pure for loop. So get rid of that, and then let's put int I equals 0 as the first part of the for loop, and then I less than 10 as the condition, and of course the increment is I++. So this is sort of a typical example of a for loop. We can eyeball this one line and we can know it happens 10 times. I goes from 0 to 9, and the body is executed. So in general, we can define the number of times we want to run it as n, and then we can give some value n as the number of times we want to run the loop. So let's go to our program from last time, countchars.c, and let's convert it to use a for loop rather than a while loop. Notice the structure of the loop has what we need for the for loop. We have, in the beginning, we have a counter variable which we're initializing to 0. In the expression part of the while loop, we're getting a character and then comparing it to see if it's the end of the file. And then in the increment part, we're incrementing the nc variable. So we have the 3 parts we need to make up a for loop. So let's write it for nc equals 0, getchar not equal EOF, and then finally we have ++nc for our increment. Okay, so that's it for our 3 elements. Now what do we put in the body? So in this case, what do we want to do each time we go through the loop? So it turns out in this case we have nothing we want to do, so our body will be empty. And so in this case we can write the empty body in 2 ways. We can use braces, that is open brace and close brace, or we can just write a single semicolon. And so occasionally this sort of thing happens in C programs. We call this the null statement. It means we're not doing anything in this statement. We're doing all the work we need to already in the for loop. So we don't really need to do anything. So let's recompile it and make sure it still works as we expect. So run the program and give it some input. I'll give it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So enter counts as 1, and give it the end of the file, so I get 9. And remember the reason it's 9, I typed in the digits 1 through 8, but then when I press enter at the end, that counts as a character as well. And let's try it again with no characters at all. So just run it and press Ctrl-Z, enter, and I should get 0 as the count. And that's it for part 6 of C99 tutorial. Stay tuned for part 7.